Miss Zürcher, for many years now, you have had out-of-body experiences. Can you tell us how these came about? Yes, gladly, Mr. Schulnig. But above all, and first of all, I would like to thank those who are making their near-death experiences public now. This is a very important step forward, because this makes it also possible for people, as for me, for example, to recount their experiences, thereby making them public, even though these are somewhat different in nature. And perhaps in this way, we are considered to be credible as well. And that's what's very important for me. For many years, I've been having out-of-body experiences, and this means that I consciously enter into different dimensions. And I have also had other experiences, such as teleportations and prescience, and so on. It all started very tragically, because I didn't know anything about these things. I was quite a normal, working human being. I was neither spiritual nor religious. I was never concerned with things like this. That's why the first conscious, unusual experience was very tragic for me. On that day, I had just moved to a strange city, together with my little daughter. I didn't yet have a telephone connection, nor did I know anybody there. And I had collapsed into bed, tired to death, at 2 a.m. in the morning. But sleep was far away. Suddenly, in my mind's eye, I found myself beneath the ceiling. Thereupon, I went back again into my physical body. Then the same thing started all over again, and I didn't know what was going on. After an hour of this, I gathered all my courage and rang at my neighbor's door, asking if it would be possible to call my doctor, because I was quite frightened. And in fact, the doctor himself picked up the phone at 3 a.m., and I told him the whole story. Whereupon he said that he had never heard of such things before, and then he said in plain Swiss German, "Do you have some Flumli?" And I did have some at home, indeed. And so he added, "Drink a very big glass of it." This was his only medical advice, because he was at his wit's end. Flumli is something like schnapps. Yes, that's correct. It's a kind of schnapps. Although usually I avoid drinking alcohol, I drank a whole glass of the stuff in this distress, whereupon I was so drunk that I didn't know anymore what was going on. And this finally was my first experience. And no one could help you or explain to you that it was an out-of-body experience? No, the doctors and many other physicians that I subsequently consulted. I was also in hospital for 10 days, but no one knew about such things, and this experience was only the beginning. Many a time at night, while fully awake, my spirit was of a clarity that you are never able to experience inside your body. And so I was standing in an apartment that was completely strange to me. But nevertheless, I knew the family name of these people, even though I didn't have their address, consequently not knowing at all where these people were living. Nonetheless, I was standing in their apartment. Tell me, how did you perceive yourself in this situation? I simply perceived myself consciously, without a body, but nevertheless disposing of full consciousness. On the next day, I found the family name, which was one of the rare ones, in the phone book, as well as the address and the phone number. Thereupon, I made an appointment with the people living there. But first I drew a picture of what I had seen in this apartment, and I gave it to these people before entering the apartment, and the people could not but verify it. Everything was on point, and I've had many experiences of this kind. How did you experience the return into your earthly body each time? I must say that this is quite a special process, because usually you pass out. Thereupon, you are asleep for a while in your physical body, and you are not aware of how you return. Then you wake up with the impression that you have been dreaming. You understand, but due to the fact that I had such a clear awareness, that I knew the name of these people, I was able to verify this exceptional experience afterwards. In another case, years later, when I had already become more experienced, so to speak, I also entered otherworldly dimensions while outside my body. And when I returned, without having had this little bit of sleep in the meantime, and fully conscious, I found this to be the worst thing that could happen to you. It takes about 3 days to overcome it, to cope with this yearning for the true home. Could you also tell us something about your journeys into these otherworldly dimensions? Thank God, because I was lucky enough to give evidence of all this as far as possible on the earth afterwards, and thankfully, I was many times in the position to do so. And over there, in the hereafter, I went purely and simply through a kind of heavenly gate, from one dimension into the other. And this can simply only be seen as a heavenly gate. And that's the only way I can describe it. And I can also be compared with a wall, just being somewhat darker when you pass through this gate into the heavenly sphere into which I had gone. The door had been opened, I entered, and I saw a very long table around which many people were sitting, among them my mother-in-law, who had already passed over some time ago, and she immediately recognized me and was delighted to see me. She asked me if I could help her, as she has had some trouble with her children, who in their normal life had always been nice to each other, and now they were squabbling quite a lot among themselves. So she was asking me if I could do something about it, so that they might bury their differences and get along again. So on the next day I thought to myself that if I were to tell my former husband that I had visited his mother in the hereafter, he would have thought, she was quite normal before, wasn't she? For this reason, I decided to put it differently, and I asked him, how are you and how is your sister? And he said, oh, unfortunately, we have totally broken up, and it doesn't look like this will ever be good again. Whereupon I asked him, on my own behalf, to resolve the dispute for the sake of the good. And I do hope that due to my endeavors, this has happened. When you met your mother-in-law in the hereafter, did you see or perceive something else besides a table with many people? The only other thing I realized was that this sphere was not as bright as the ones I experienced on the occasion of my later journeys to these spiritual places. During my later journeys, I initially always visited the same place, namely a city, in which the houses were built on piles in the water. And I was there frequently. And every time I went, I was back again in life. I also used to call it the current of life. And even if this was not water, it felt like water. And I was up there, but also in the water. But there never was a lack of fresh air, you know. And I was taken from and to this place in intervals. Or I was, I really must say, in paradise-like spheres that you cannot imagine. This is so beautiful and the colors so wonderful that I did not want to come back anymore. And it was a hard inner battle until I finally understood why this was as it is, namely because my task here on earth had not yet been fulfilled. I was not yet allowed to stay there, but I didn't see anybody in the very high spheres that actually consisted only of spirit and beauty. But it's difficult for me to pass on these insights because this immediately gives me the goosebumps. May I return to the issue of the normal spheres you were talking about when you saw your mother-in-law? What did she look like? She looked almost as she did on earth, but she rather appeared to me to be a spirit. But basically, she looked as she did on earth. Was she younger looking? She looked much better, really. But let me take up the issue of looking younger, which is mentioned so often. I have visited astral spheres often, where I was always accompanied by spiritual companions, who, one night, led me in front of a mirror, so that I was able to see myself as a spirit body. And I must say, I had the greatest respect, because I first thought, oh, for God's sake, what will I see in this mirror? You understand, what will I look like? And I stepped in front of the mirror very cautiously. But I was completely satisfied, for I looked much younger and better. I wish I would still look like this. But, well, I was able to see my spirit body a few times in this mirror. Can you also tell us about some experiences that you can remember especially well? I can. Most of the time, I traveled alone through the spiritual spheres, also in the cities there. But I also met a few other spirit beings. Later, I visited some other cities, which I was very interested in, because these cities were somehow different from our earthly cities. It's difficult to describe it, because all this is simply spirit, you know, and here we have no words to describe this. So, if I understand you properly, in the hereafter, you experienced shapes, so therefore, it was not a shapeless world. Definitely, I perceived it in shapes, and I also felt, when I was traveling from the earthly into the spirit world, for example, that the earthly travel took a longer time than the travel into the spiritual dimensions, where you could get somewhere in no time at all. Isn't this strange? So when you were moving in the earthly dimensions, this happened very slowly. One could feel a certain distance that was present, even though it did not last long. You understand. And I also felt the air resistance. All this was existent. I was above the earth, and I also saw the lights shining from the earth and from the cities, and so on. Are there any dangers with respect to out-of-body journeys? Oh, I can tell you a thing or two about attacks by disembodied spirits who do not mean well, and in this regard, I had to endure great struggles, and I still today do not know how I got over this alone. It was really bad. I could never sleep without a light at night, and I have to say that on top of it, I experienced a Kundalini awakening, and I'm not sure if you know what that is. No, I don't exactly know what it is. Neither did I, but I experienced it. I did not know anything at all about these things. I have also never read or heard anything about it. I just had to experience it. And it also does not at all belong to the religion we have, such a Kundalini awakening. And also the doctors that I consulted didn't know a thing about it. And this, as well as the attacks of the evil spirits, was indeed the source of suffering for me. What did these disembodied spirits look like when you were experiencing their attacks? They were all only dark entities. So you have only seen a dark being. Yes, a dark being. I assure you, they intended to penetrate me, to penetrate my body. There was one of them who hit my upper left arm, so that my spirit body flew out beyond the opposite side of my body. Can you imagine how hard I was battling, although being so small? But in this situation, I developed adequate powers. How frequently did you experience those attacks during your out-of-body experiences? The worst experiences I went through took some weeks, but the whole procedure took years. These attacks didn't impress you to the point that you refused to make any further out-of-body experiences? No, not at all, and to the contrary. Especially not when I had overcome that, because these evil experiences finally led to the special protection which had been bestowed upon me. Because one is never left alone in this situation, and this is an incredible protection indeed. And sometimes, by day, I also was able to observe a kind of bright beam of light coming toward me, and I now ask myself, from where? Did you have a kind of guardian spirit who was accompanying you during these out-of-body experiences? Yes, definitely, and I saw it often. What did it look like? It appeared very bright and was dressed in a very bright robe, and its head was radiant. And there was still another one, an elderly gentleman with a beard, who seemed to be an erudite man, and who frequently sat upon the side of my bed and instructed me. You told me that at times you also only partially left your body. Can you describe such a situation? This was at the very beginning of these experiences. I woke up at night in my physical body and sat up, but my physical body was still lying in bed fully extended, because my spirit body only half unfolded from my physical body. And when turning my head, I saw my grandfather standing next to my bed, and next to him a companion in wonderful colors. I must say, the whole room was full of people. Your grandfather had already died? I didn't know that, because I did not have any contact with him for a long period of time. He was in Germany, and I was in Switzerland. Well, I didn't have any contact, so I had no idea. On the next morning, I asked my husband, who was lying in his bed next to me, "Did you also see these beings last night?" But he did not. The next night, the same procedure happened again. I was sitting up, half out of my physical body, and again I saw my grandfather next to me, gesticulating to the gentleman next to him, and to the many people in the room. And all of them were looking so kind-heartedly that I wasn't frightened, because this was such an affectionate atmosphere. And all of them were spirit beings? Yes, yes, all of them were spirit beings in beautiful colors. And because I had become curious, of course, I phoned Germany to ask if grandfather was well, but I was told that he had died that same night. You didn't speak with your grandfather? No. Then in this sense, this was a contact with the deceased. Yes, but I also visited with some girlfriends over there who had died in a car accident, for example, and this also I didn't know beforehand. And afterwards, I asked around, "How is she?" And I saw some of them over there, not knowing that they had already passed over. You have told me that you would have seen a silver cord during your out-of-body journeys. Yes, that's true. We were talking about the dangers, and it is indeed very dangerous for a human being to provoke such an out-of-body journey. What I mean is that when such out-of-body experiences are artificially created, in order to experience the great thing, you understand? But that's not what I did. I was never provoking it, but I simply let it happen. But if you provoke it without the protection of any spirit beings to guide you, please understand, you will run the risk that this silver cord tears. And the silver cord maintains a permanent connection between the physical body and the spirit body, whereby the spirit body is tightly woven into the physical body, thereby putting the physical body in motion, because the physical body cannot live without the spirit body. And this connection is provided by the so-called silver cord. I have, thank God, very frequently experienced and seen it, but to the general public, it is completely unknown that it exists at all. Can you describe this silver cord? Yes, absolutely. If you start an out-of-body journey, you leave your body, but the silver cord wants to hold you back because it would like you to stay inside your body. And I have seen this silver cord, which has, let's say, a thickness of about 8 centimeters, and it's not at all elastic because it holds you back, and it's a dark gray color. And the greater the distance from your physical body, the brighter it becomes. Then I thought, there is something over there. I have to go over there. And then I went to that place, and for this reason, funnily enough, I first put on, in thought, very heavy Swiss military boots in order to be even heavier in weight, thus constituting a counterweight to the power of the silver cord. But nevertheless, I was able to move further away from my physical body. And this was what was happening in the beginning. And due to this experience, I know about the silver cord, because before I knew nothing about it. And afterwards, I saw this silver cord again and again. And I have seen it the most clearly when I was in one of the very high spheres that was the equivalent of a high spiritual level. And there I saw on the horizon a silver cord that was bent toward me, thereby forming a bow, and it was very clear and in bright silver. And years later, someone told me that such an observation is indeed mentioned in the Old Testament. Miss Zürcher, you have had a lot of out-of-body experiences. Now, if you reflect upon this, upon these other worlds, what kind of impression do you gain of the hereafter? I must say very honestly that the dimension you will reach depends, of course, on how far your mental development on Earth has progressed. If you will reach the lower astral worlds or the higher astral worlds, or if you will reach still higher dimensions. You understand, this is the destiny of each of us, and it depends on the particular consciousness of each of us. You say that one cannot reach each and every sphere in the hereafter that one desires. No, not at all. You have to do something for that, and that is learning and simply being committed to the good. We on Earth, we are really still at the beginning. For example, what we are gradually realizing is the enormous quantity of the meat we are eating. And for this reason, we are killing 60 billions of animals every year. They are just murdered. And this involves also the suffering of these artificially produced animals, which are kept in narrow stables and fed in order to be fat, and then to be killed. Miss Zürcher, What impact did all these experiences have on your worldview, on your view of the hereafter, as well as on your conception with respect to our earth? I must say that it is quite horrible to see what mankind is doing. If you imagine that those having near-death experiences change their whole life, don't they? And now imagine that for decades, I myself have been making out-of-body journeys into the hereafter that have a totally different vibration, emanating an incredible harmony, except for the very low astral worlds where those souls go who still have a lot to learn. But I have sometimes visited them, but this is not such a pleasant place. But apart from that, it's a wonderful world over there, a paradise-like world, whereas here on earth, we still have to learn a lot, and there's still so much to be done. And our Earth is a planet where we still have to learn a lot, and one cannot understand that nations and their presidents support the manufacture of new military weaponry instead of teaching peace and practical charity, as well as helping the poor instead of letting them starve to death. Well, I myself am presently incarnated here on earth, and I see how so many people are afraid of dying. And the reason why I am making my experiences public through your channel is to communicate to my fellow men that there is a life after life on earth. And that's the main point here, I think. There are different ways to leave the body. I can delineate that in detail sometimes, no matter how, and above all physicians should be informed about how the soul separates from the physical body. And this alone ought to be reassuring for everyone, because this indicates that life continues after life on earth, and that based on rebirth, the so-called reincarnation, humans are given the possibility to make amends for past mistakes. And that's the most important thing of all, I think. Miss Zürcher, I cannot thank you enough for this wonderful interview. It's been my pleasure.